If you measure people's wealth by how lavish their lives are, you're about to be shocked. No, seriously, these 10 extremely rich people live outrageously normal lives, to the point of being frustrating. What good is having $110 billion if you can't blow it on a solid gold car, a fancy tank, or just sticking with the classics and buying a $500 million yacht? Well, these 10 billionaires have something else in mind. Number 10, Chuck Finney. You might wonder why someone worth $1.5 million is on this list. Chuck Finney once had billions. After all, that's not even as much as one car in Jeff Bezos' garage. Yes, as of 2022, 91-year-old Chuck Finney is only worth $1.5 million. But just 2 decades ago, he had over $8 billion in his bank account. You might think it takes a lot of cocaine and prostitutes to blow through $7.9 billion in just 2 decades. But for this Irish-American businessman, a flashy lifestyle was never the goal. Not only did he not spend that jaw-dropping amount on luxurious drugs, fancy cars, or expensive gifts for ladies of the night, but he donated it all to charity. Chuck entered the 9-figure club in the mid-1990s, mainly thanks to his duty-free liquor business in Asia, which he started in the 1960s. Finney sold duty-free alcohol to U.S. soldiers stationed in Korea and later expanded to other countries. His business took off when, in the early 60s, he became the exclusive duty-free sales dealer in Hawaii. In the 70s and 80s, his duty-free purchases became the largest travel retailer in the world, giving him immense wealth and power. However, Finney wasn't interested in any of that. He secretly gave away his entire fortune while living a modest and unremarkable life. In 1997, after a legal battle with his former partner Robert Warren Miller, Finney came to light as the man behind countless charitable works and donations. Forbes dubbed him the billionaire who wanted to die broke. Later, he was also called the James Bond of philanthropy, as it became clear that he donated around $8 billion to charities that inspired people like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and others to give a big chunk of their earnings. Even so, none of them live as modestly as Chuck. Today, at 91 years old, he lives in an apartment in San Francisco and has a pension fund of $1.5 million. He doesn't have yachts, cars, or houses. He only has one golden object, his heart. That's what I call impressing your rich friends. Number 9, Tim Cook. Have you heard of a little tech company called Apple? You've probably noticed them around. It's hard to overlook a company that's worth $2.4 trillion. Well, their CEO, Tim Cook, unlike the company, has a measly $800 million in his bank account. Not bad, I agree, especially since he rarely touches his funds. Instead, Tim prefers to live a normal and modest life. Too normal, in my opinion. The man is the definition of a workaholic. Meet someone who gets up at 3:45 a.m. and he answers 800 emails a day. The only man with more emails is the Nigerian prince who needs your help and is willing to share his huge fortune with you. Tim doesn't talk much about himself because he doesn't find it interesting. We don't agree on this. But just like the cook, I also like scrambled eggs, bacon, cereal, and almond milk. Now, if you had $1.8 billion, would you be the first one to get to the office every day? Tim, for sure. Well, when you wake up at 4 a.m., that's not especially hard. Still, everyone who works with Cook agrees that he's the best boss in the world. He never yells or dismisses the ideas and complaints of his subordinates. Number 8. You could forgive someone for thinking that the first image that comes to mind when talking about Indian billionaires is a $2 billion house disguised as a skyscraper. However, Mukesh Ambani, the owner of the fascinating Antilia house, isn't the only wealthy entrepreneur in this country of 1.3 billion people. Today, we're going to focus on those who don't use as much electricity as the entire city of Mumbai for their hot tub, but instead give back to society every now and then. When it comes to Ashin Premji and his $9.2 billion, he's nowhere near Amadeus. he's nowhere near Ambani's wealth. But Premji is probably at the top when it comes to charity work and achievements. His Wipro was nothing more than a small family business before a SIM took over. That's why they call this genius the Indian Bill Gates. Today, his company brings in almost $11 billion a year and is constantly increasing its revenue. Despite his hefty bank account, which will soon have another zero, Premji never forgot his humble beginnings. While his counterparts often travel in luxury on their multi-million-dollar private jets filled with all kinds of amenities, the Indian tech mogul prefers to spend less and always flies economy class. Plus, while other billionaires have golden Rolls-Royces and Bugatti Veyrons, Premji has a nice and comfy Honda Civic worth about $16,000. Naturally, as he gained popularity due to public demand, he was forced to give up his trusty Honda, and now he has a used Mercedes-Benz that he bought from one of his employees. 1,000%, of course, from an HR perspective, buying a car for your employees is a disaster for motivation and reputation. But Prem's reputation precedes him, as everyone who works at his company knows that the boss is a truly exceptional guy. Number 7. Mark Zuckerberg. It's strange to see Zuck so low on the list of rich people, but let's be honest, it hasn't been the best year for Meta. Still, $41 billion isn't just for having panic attacks at night, and it definitely doesn't keep me up at night thinking about how the Facebook guy would live with such modest savings. To be honest, Mark prefers a low-key lifestyle. Yeah, he likes luxury and has some notable purchases in his portfolio, like his Lake Tahoe estate and his house in Palo Alto, but they're mostly investments. Of course, he lives there, but there are no crazy golden toilets, diamond chandeliers, or high-tech cannons to shoot out fresh gray t-shirts every morning. Oh, wait, this last one he definitely has. In fact, his houses are equipped with high-end AI assistants, but they hardly cost him anything since he built them himself. However, when it comes to luxury comforts, Zuckerberg isn't really into them. He prefers practical cars like a Golf GTI, an Acura, a TSX, or a Honda Fit. All of them are worth less than $30,000. What he really spends money on is vacations for his family and charity, lots of charity. He spends billions funding medical research and programs that benefit others. If I could make Facebook less of a marketing trap, that would be great. But hey, giving a platform to meaningless ads that don't offer you anything in exchange for a ton of money can also be considered a charity, right? Number 6. Ingvar Kamprad. Can you believe that a guy who managed to make Lego for adults while taking all the fun out of it is worth $42.5 billion? Billions. I suspect it's monopoly money, but when you realize I'm talking about the owner of IKEA, this figure will seem a little more accurate. People who have never had to assemble an IKEA wardrobe can't know what desperation is like. I guess the fact that Ingvar Kamprad didn't enjoy his billions and lived a modest, reclusive life is some kind of payback for all the misery he caused around the world. Jokes aside, the furniture mogul was an example of a self-made billionaire who didn't let the money go to his head. Kamprad founded IKEA when he was just 17, and the brand quickly took over the world while his finances skyrocketed and floated between Venus and Mercury. His lifestyle stayed the same while he lived. He only flew economy class and never traded in his 20-year-old Volvo for a new one. But that's not all. Apparently, he always bought his clothes at a flea market to save some cash. On top of that, he preferred to get his hair cut in third world countries because 22 euros seemed way too expensive to him. I don't think I had any chance of becoming the best friend of the Sultan of Brunei, who once paid $20,000 for a simple haircut. Number 5. Amancio Ortega. You might not know who Amancio Ortega is, but his $62.1 billion suggests you should. Even though Ortega by himself isn't a superstar like other billionaires, his most famous fashion brand, Zara, is definitely among the most popular in the world. The Spanish brand can be found all over the world with its stylish yet affordable clothing. Amancio Ortega has never cared about his image. The retailer has given only 3 interviews. He stayed in La Coruña. The brilliant retailer, who turned a small clothing store in La Coruña into a global empire, has only given 3 interviews in his entire life. Unlike most successful designers, he did not go and live in luxury in Paris or Milan, but stayed right where he was born, in La Coruña. To top it off, despite his success, he still had his morning coffee at the same old cafe. Amancio, a man of habit, it's no surprise he liked to wear the same old clothes and have lunch at the company cafeteria surrounded by all his employees. I'm not sure how that's not a security threat. But hey, I've never owned a global fashion brand, so who am I to judge? Number 4, Alice Walton. If the first part of Walton sounds familiar, it might be because you usually shop at Walton. It's a small company called Walmart. You might have heard of him. Yeah, the name might not be as imaginative as other brands, but who cares when you own a third of a $244.86 billion business? That's how Alice Walton feels, one of the heirs of the Walton dynasty. And while if I had $62.1 billion, a Bugatti Veyron would be at the top of my long bucket list, Alice is not so seduced by the glamours that money offers. Instead, Walton prefers to invest in art, and more specifically, in sharing that art with the rest of the world. Alice spent $500 million creating her own private art collection. In 2011, she invested $50 million in opening an American art museum in Arkansas. And if you think that's expensive, wait until you find out how much the centerpiece costs. She spent $44.4 million on a single painting by George O'Keeffe. You might have noticed that it's not exactly the discreet lifestyle I mentioned. But in fact, art is the only thing Alice spends money on, and she shares it with the world. Plus, she donates millions each year to artists and other causes. I wonder if that's a rebellion against the Walton family. She wanted to be a struggling artist, but her dad told her no, that she would be a billionaire. There's no dirty floor in New York for you, young lady. Number 3, Sergey Brin. Unlike Google, which knows everything, ironically, its co-founder, Sergey Brin, is one of the most enigmatic billionaires in the world. Unlike most billionaires born in Russia, who owe their wealth to Vladimir Putin and his, let's say, governing style, Sergey Brin has earned his wealth through hard work, a lot of sacrifices, and many sleepless nights. Also, unlike the rest of his peers, Sergey leads a relatively low-key life where he lets his work speak louder than his purchases. So, instead of buying a $500 million yacht, he invests money in a lot of new projects. Most of them are related to improving humanity. Brin spent large amounts of his fortune funding various renewable energy projects, as well as some space exploration work. Other than that, Sergey rarely makes the news, and, for some obscure reason, Google's algorithm refuses to share any gossip about the Russian-born genius. I wonder why. Number 2, Carlos Slim. Carlos Slim has a truly inspiring story. Born in Mexico to Lebanese immigrant parents, no one expected Carlos to become one of the richest people in the world. Today, thanks to his telecommunications empire, Slim is worth over $88 billion and can proudly call himself the richest man in Mexico. Despite his wealth, Carlos still lives the simple life he had when he started selling candy and drinks to his friends and family at the age of 10. Now he fights much less for money, but Slim hasn't let his fortune go to his head and has never changed his home, not even after 40 years at the top. Naturally, private jets and yachts are out of his scope. Even though he has over $88 billion, he keeps his monthly salary at just $24,000. The rest he donates to charities, funds Mexican infrastructure, and tries to fight poverty. Number 1, Warren Buffett. If Warren Buffett were a country, he would be the 63rd richest country in the world. I wonder what it feels like to be richer than 2/3 of all the nations on Earth, but somehow I can't even wrap my head around how that's possible. Well, when you own more than 0.1% of all the money in the world, I guess you get a new perspective on life. However, with all that money, Buffett refuses to live lavishly. What can you expect from a guy who, instead of candy or toys, bought stock shares at the age of 11? This kid must have been a nightmare during family dinners, always talking about the market instead of crying about having to eat his veggies. Well, it turned out to be the right decision for Warren, as he is now worth over $109.6 billion. Despite his enormous fortune, Buffett lives in a cozy little house in Omaha, Nebraska. It's the same house he bought 50 years ago with his wife. He often says he could afford to live in the biggest mansion in the world, but it wouldn't have the memories that his home does. Plus, even though he owns one of the largest private jet companies in the world, he refuses to fly in luxury class, probably because he knows how much they charge for the trip. What's up with all these billionaires these days? They don't know that you need a Bugatti Veyron if you want to make it onto the luxury lists more often. I guess when you have that much money and you prefer not to flaunt it, you really don't care that much about looking good on the lists. Well, it doesn't matter if they miss out. These are the 10 most modest billionaires I've ever seen. Would you be just as humble if you had a 10-figure sum in your bank account? If you found these discreet lifestyles interesting, let me know in the comments.